Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk at this meeting. I like it very much. It's a great place to be for some days and just sit and think and discuss. So it's a great opportunity. And also the master students, if you need any ideas, you come up to me later. So what I will do, I will talk about network governance. That's quite obvious. But I will also try to introduce some new ideas. I'm not really clear whether they make sense, because I also would like to use this group to get some feedback on where to go, because I'm kind of being not so excited anymore about network governance the way I have approached it, and I'm looking for some new energy and ideas. So maybe we can work on that together. This is the basis of a paper. This paper is not published. This is work in progress. It's a little bit. It has a kind of a sad story because it's actually a paper which is done in honor of Keith Provan. Keith Provan died in 3 years ago. 3 years ago in 2014, kind of suddenly. And I worked a lot with him on this issue of network governance. And for those who are in the field of organization studies or health policy studies or public administration, they know Keith, and they know that he was a great guy and that he had a great number of ideas and that he shared them with everybody. Richard knows him, or knew him as well, very well, I think so. And so we were actually asked by several people, couldn't we kind of make an article about in which the work of Keith Provan plays a central role, and that's actually what we are trying to do with this paper, and we'll see where we get, and it's not finished yet, but we're working on it. So the objective of this paper is to see how network governance has been developed as a topic. And I ask here 3 questions. The first is what it needed to become so prominent as a topic. Governance, network governance in general, because that, I think, and that is also, it's not by accident, you have now chosen this also as a topic for the conference, so there must be something which made this topic kind of interesting. Then the question is where it has gone. I answer that question on the basis of a review of an article of Keith, which co-authored with him. And then the question is where should it be going, and that's a kind of an open question. I'm not very sure about that, and maybe we can discuss that. Together. So the first question is what it needed, and I have a list of things here which I actually not need to read now, because I want to go through these issues also one by one. But just some issues. Once we start to see complex problems, and we see the importance of relationships between organizations, all these kind of things. But I'll rather illustrate them by some examples. So as far as the first point is concerned, the prevalence of complex or wicked problems in addition to simple and complicated problems. So we're kind of dealing more and more with complex problems, and we have heard this morning. There is a kind of an attention for complex problems, and we see more complex problems, or we define more and more complex problems. And I've just taken an example here. This is a report written by Ilona Kikbush. I don't know, for those who are in health policy, they know her. She's a kind of a thought leader in the field of health policy. And just before the new president of the new director of WHO was going to be elected, she wrote this paper with a group of people, and it's entitled New Direction in Governing the Global Health Domain. Now the reason is that WHO has done many things in coordinating health, but when it came to complex issues like the Ebola crisis, they kind of very often missed the target. So the report says in 2014, when Ebola reached the cities of West Africa, it was simultaneously a health and humanitarian crisis, but treated by WHO primarily as the former. So WHO had a kind of a view on this issue, and that's how they dealt with it. Then they, on the basis of that, they developed 10 trends. The paper can be downloaded from the internet, so you can look at these trends, and these trends are then kind of summarized in 2 mega trends. And the first megatrend is new political spaces for global health. And what you're saying here is the main game of global health will increasingly be played out beyond what has been traditionally defined as the global health architecture. So in my definition, this means differentiation. There is more and more differentiation. The field becomes more and more complex. More actors get involved. You need more actors, so that's differentiation. And the second megatrend is increasingly dynamic policy alignments for global health. So the dominant approach to govern is increasingly the building and shaping cross-national networks, creating hybrid organizations. That's for me the kind of the sentence which says a lot about integration. So that's really a nice kind of illustration of the importance of differentiation and integration. And the quote 64 in the report is actually a citation to a paper of Keith as well again. So that's really showing that some people have done research about that, and that WHO has also to change in the way they're organizing and doing things. Now, since I found out that there are many young parents here, people with kids and so on, I thought I'd add another slide just during lunch to actually illustrate the difference between simple, complicated, and complex problems. Because I think that's one of the important issues when I talk about governance, I use it. That's also the reason why I didn't start with a definition. I will show a definition later because first of all I want to show what you need governance for. Because the idea is that governance is everywhere and everybody uses it and it becomes completely indiscriminate, and so it doesn't tell a lot. So I'm actually happy that somebody was sitting here and saying, I have no governance, no, nothing. It's not. I have to think about it, and I don't know. So that was kind of refreshing to see a person who doesn't use the word governance because it's used. But so I use it actually. I'm a student of organizations, and so I use it when I need it to explain something. So organization science, they think about how to get things done. So when I need it, then I will use it, but then I have to define it also. I've also defined it, and that's the way I work, and I'll work towards such a definition. And therefore, one of the main issues is governance you need in cases of complex problems, not for complicated problems, and not for simple problems, because for these problems we have already a whole set of coordination mechanisms and systems we know from organization studies we can use for those. But how do we deal with complex problems? That is the real issue, and we had a presentation about that already this morning. And therefore, I'm always looking for ways to show the difference between simple, complicated, and complex problems. And that's from a book. And here you see a simple problem is baking a cake. Some people cannot do it, but you just read the receipt another time, and it will work. And sending a rocket to the moon, some people would think this is a complex problem, but that's not really. It's actually an algorithm. And you can actually calculate whether it will work or not. But the complex problem is raising a child. And I like that. And if you look at what is all here, that's my observation. That's why I have that slide. That is very, very well explaining what network governance is also about. Yeah? Raising one child provides experience, but there's no guarantee of success with the next. Expertise helps, but only when balanced with responsiveness of the particular child. So also the object of coordination has to be part of the system. Uncertainty of outcome remains. Every child is unique. You can tell that as a parent as well. And this I like very much. Can't separate the parts from the whole. Yeah. Essence exists in the relationship between different people, different experience, different moments in time. And that is actually something which, for me, network governance is about. So there's a very nice explanation of what network governance is. It's for another context. But it also started me or remembered me of an African proverb, and which says it needs a village to raise a child. And that's for me also a very good saying to explain what network governance is really about. I mean, it's like a village, and that village has to work. It's a differentiated settings of roles and actors and situations, and we need to find out how the integration of these villages or of these networks work. So that's for me the kind of the essence. I have added, because of the discussion we had already the days before, I also think it's important to differentiate between cooperation, coordination, and collaboration. And also there, I would say, when we need governance, we need governance because of collaboration. Yeah? Because cooperation, that is just people exchange information, like we do, and we learn a lot, and we go home, and we're a little bit smarter, and we know other things. But there is no necessity that we actually have to change our behavior in any way or something like that. But we could also say we are coordinating, and we are doing that also because we are doing a book. So we make a kind of a shared service, and the idea there is also, okay, it's very important that you have some rules about when we have to hand in the papers and how they should look like and so on and so forth. But we do that for our one paper, and then we have the book. But still there, we don't really have to change anything in our operational or principal primary processes, because we do that all the time, writing papers and articles. There is nothing new to us. Now, then collaboration is actually we're going to do something together, but we have to change in order to do that. I mean, we are filmed individually for interviews. That's good, but we could also have the idea we're making a movie together, we as a group. Now, people will get nervous because we'll have to do things in a very different way as you usually do. You start looking at, am I dressed properly for the movie, and so on and so forth. So you would have to change, actually, you think, to produce that collaborative effort. And that makes a difference. That's also, again, and that's where governance, also here we have a lot of knowledge about coordination or how to build these kind of relationships, but in the last case we need governance. I show another way to bring me to the topic of this governance. This is from the field of political science, public relations. We have heard it also this morning. We have these kinds of, we so very often say there is a limit of marketization and the classical hierarchical approach. And there's a little bit the history of public administration. So we started with the public management, a kind of paradigm, the just state of here is the rule of order. Then we went to new public management. Then we have network governance, and then we have now the newest paradigm in public administration. I don't know whether you know that, but it's societal resilience. That's the new thing. All kind of actors come together, and they produce a better society, so to say. And the question is. Network governance, what does that mean to network governance? This is called network governance, but as I will explain later, that's not the topic I will use, that's an other use. I call this doctrines. Yeah, I will show that later, that these are 4 doctrines, so they're more normative aspects, and I will use governance as an organizational principle, and I will show later how that links to these different fields. Then we have the next point, maybe, the rise of governance of the concept. So they've written books, and Christoph Ansel and Jacob Torfing have written a book, I don't know how many pages. I have a chapter in that, so I should know that, but Theories of Governance, and maybe there are other people who have a chapter in that book here. And that is really putting the governance issue on the market. And another thing I wanted to show, that's a little bit, for a shy person as me, that's a little bit of a problem, but that is actually an article which studied the citation of articles in the field of public administration in the last 30 years, and they made a ranking of the highest ranked articles in that field. That was not the issue of the article. The article is really about what kind of papers make it to citations and which kind of papers do not make it to citations. And people very often think that the empirical work gets more citations, and they prove that the conceptual papers get more citations. That's actually what the article is about. But the article shows, of course, also the list of the 70 highest cited papers in the field in the 30 years in public administration, and you'll see the article of Keith and me as a co-author is the highest cited paper, and that I didn't want to show, but I wanted to show that also maybe, but what I really wanted to show is that you look, Yeah, of course. I should have done that. That would have worked, yeah. But What I really wanted to show is that when you look at this list, and this is only the first, but because the list is 70 papers, you will see that almost more than a third of these articles, the highest cited papers, are about governance. And the other topic is e-government and e-governments. And the third group of articles is about citizen engagement. So these are the three topics which you now find most published in the top journals. And so the interesting thing, they have all in some way to do with relational issues. So it's all about relational issues. So relational thinking is becoming really, it's kind of a really becoming dominant paradigm. So that's maybe good for the students to know that if you go in a direction, go in the direction of of relational thinking. Now, another thing I wanted to show in order to kind of show what the governance is about. We have seen that already before, the transaction cost theory, but I presented it in a little bit a different way because normally this part is in the middle, but I present it as here we have buy, make, or ally. And what I would like to show with that slide, that is for me, is network governance is of another order, because in another presentation, I think in your presentation, Michael, you had it as one of the three in the transaction cost theory, and I've put it out of transaction cost theory because I think the whole thinking of network governance, my thinking, doesn't fit transaction cost theory very well. And what I try to show, and I try to show that here, because in transaction cost theory or in many economic theories, what you have is actually that you start from the single actor. Here it's the single actor operating in a market. Here's the single actor which needs to get organized because he or she needs to do things which can otherwise not be acquired. And here is the kind of egocentric network. So you start from the principle of the ego, who is collaborating with some alters. But in the fourth case, and that is another, for me, that is a kind of a paradigmatic shift, is you move to another level and you move to the collective level. Here you have an organization system where nobody can produce what they like to produce. This is a result which nobody can produce individually, but you can only produce it collectively. And that's for economists. That's of course a bridge too far, so to say. Yeah, but luckily enough, we had one economist, and that was of course Ostrom, who got a Nobel Prize for this. And I really want to distinguish her and her work especially from Williamson, who got also the Nobel Prize for transaction cost theory. So it's also interesting that two guys got the prize for the same theory. But in any case, maybe it was a bridge too far to give a woman all the prize money of $1 million, and so they said they have to give it to a man because Ostrom, as you might know, was the first woman.
That's equality.
Yeah, that's equality, yeah. That's the first woman who received the Nobel Prize for economics. But what you see here is that with Williamson, he got the Nobel Prize for his analysis of economic governance, especially the boundaries of the firm. So that's really still this egocentric kind of perspective, whereas Ostrom got the Nobel Prize for analysis of economic governance, especially the commons. And if you look back here, that is really about the commons, and that's a kind of different, it's a different production system, it's a different way to get things done. That's, for me, that's a fundamental issue, that network governance, as I define it, is a different way to get things done than you could do either by market, by hierarchy, or by bilateral relationships. It's also something, maybe, what I could say at this point, there is a huge difference, really a huge difference, but also under-researched. For me, is a huge difference between bilateral relationship and a multilateral relationship. That's a huge difference. And what we see, we use many theories which are based on bilateral relationships to discuss multilateral relationships. When we say that trust is important in networks, we say that because we know that trust is important for bilateral relationships, but trust is not important for multilateral relationships, as I will show later. Yeah. So there are some examples where this is really a different way of organizing, and we should take that idea serious. The next, maybe that's the last point on the first list. That is actually recognizing the difference between network governance and the governance of networks. That is one thing which the article I will also tell something about later, which was written by Keith and myself. That was a kind of unintended consequences. Unintended consequence. What we actually wanted to show is that networks or organization networks can be governed in different ways. Yeah. But what the article especially did, it put network governance as a way of getting things done in the literature. So most people cite that article just by saying network governance is important. But what the article really does is showing that there are different ways of governing networks. So that's a kind of difference, and we also have to look at that difference. So from a transaction cost perspective, or from a classical perspective, here you would have theories of the market, different theories. Here you would have different forms of organizations. You had different contracts. You can deal with bilateral relationships. And here, what we actually try to do is we went down here and we said, okay, there must be different ways to govern a network. So that's a kind of zooming in the issue. And most people who cite the article, they actually stay just on that level, which was not so much intended, but okay, that's fine for us, as long as you get citations. So the question is where it has gone, and my research question is here, which network governance arrangement. So what I'm talking really about is network governance and the governance of networks. Which factors have been used to explain these differences, and what effects do network governance arrangements have? So I've treated it as a kind of what is the phenomena, what is it as a dependent variable, and has it been used as an independent variable? And what we did here, and that was actually because of that's a paper to the work of Keith Proven. We actually used this article. We look at the definition here. It's the network governance, or the governance, not network governance, but the governance of networks. It's the use of institutions and structures of authority and collaboration to allocate resources and to coordinate and control joint action across networks of organizations as a whole. So that's really our definition, what we are using all the time. We're talking about organizations, but they can, in certain circumstances, they can also be individuals, as we show in our research. But it's actually a group of people or a group of organizations who come together to produce something nobody of them could produce on their own. And the big question, so the governance question, is the red circle, is really the question of what holds the whole thing together, and what makes the thing working, and under which circumstances does that work, and under which circumstances does that not work. And what we did a systematic review of one source, only this article, and we actually looked to the citations of this article on May 28th of May. It was 2017. It was 2002. Maybe there are now, I don't know, 2040 citations by a month later probably. Web of Science database, and we had selection criteria. We looked only at articles published in a scientific journal, written in English, and the object of study is organizational networks, and it should be an empirical study. So if you look at then these 2,000 articles, you're left with 14 articles which fulfill this criteria, which was already a first surprise, but okay. Now, what did we see happening? We saw that this is going to be used, or is used, in many domains. That was also a kind of a surprise to us, because we first of all, when we wrote the article, we thought this is interesting. It needs to be written down, but probably has not a lot of impact, and it will stay in public administration because it was published in a public administration journal, and will stay there. But it didn't. It moved in all kinds of directions, in studies of industry, in kind of in crisis and emergency response, in tourism policy, in immigration policy, in sustainability. It has been cited a lot, and so on and so forth. So that is already interesting to see that is kind of the question on governance and how you organize governance. That is really a big issue in many topics, and that's what we learn here as well, of course. And I just give one example because I hope I have the time to go a little bit more into that, because that's my new project at the moment. I start now working on crisis and emergency responses together with the Dutch CDC, so the Center for Disease Control, but then the one in the Netherlands, and they just wrote a report, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I read it just before going to bed, but I advise you not to do that, because that's just 204 pages of catastrophes. It's in Dutch. So here's the whole list, and that's the impact. And you see, when the sea is flooding the Netherlands, that they consider as the highest thing with the highest impact.
But in Heidelberg.
Huh?
It's not in Heidelberg.
That's not in Heidelberg. No, the graph will be different. But we see that the epidemic issues like this one here, and then here the vogelgriep, so the birds zoonose, and some others seem to be very important issues. So we're kind of looking into these issues and how we can look at them from a policy network perspective, or from an organizational network perspective. And the reason is that they actually had the same type of problems WHO had, that they were kind of responding to some of these crises. And what they really did, they're really a very scientific organization, and they try to find all the kind of scientific evidence around these kind of bacteria or viruses, and then they make some recommendations, and these recommendations are very often completely not accepted by society or by politicians and so on and so forth. And they actually think of how could we do this in a different way. I'm working on a project there which I might present. There's just another example of where it's also just a paper which has also cited our paper just to show how important network governance is, and I like that because that's about 145,000 dairy farmers in Kenya, which all have a little plot of land, and they produce some milk, and before they couldn't do very much with the milk, and when the cow became ill, they really had a problem. And so now the issue is how can we deal with that? And they actually built this kind of organization network, which they actually started to build. And then afterwards only they found out that they were actually building an organization network, and then they started to study and then they described it, and they started to describe it in terms of network governance and so on and so forth. That's something you very often see, that these structures develop kind of organically, and then they find out that they're producing something which is collective, which was not started collective. And there is another article with all kind of programs like alcohol harm, early childhood development, maternal mortality, pneumonia, tobacco control, tuberculosis, and this article was just published, 4 challenges that global health networks face. And they also introduced governance as an issue, which is very important in the effectiveness of these networks. And it's interesting to see. This is actually the effectiveness of these networks, and you see everywhere where you have double plus, you also have a very good score on governance, which actually really proves that governance is actually something which really makes a difference in these kind of in these kind of collective systems. So it's very clear for the 3 pluses, you have a cohesive governance system. In the minuses, you have a very fragmented or no governance system, and the pluses, it's kind of in between. So this one variable from that table, at least, seems to make a big difference. So that's the kind of fields where this knowledge has been applied quite successfully and quite nice. So that's already a good news. Of the 114 articles using this concept, there are really some, I think, fascinating and very interesting studies in very different fields. So that's kind of good news. Now, the next question was which network governance arrangements have been identified so far. So that's the 3 governance arrangements we described in our article. So that's self-governance, and these are 2 brokered form of governance with 1 lead organization. The lead organization is actually an organization which is also active in the field of what is going on, and this is a network administrative organization. So that's more this kind of coordinating, facilitating organization. They don't do anything in the primary process, but they actually kind of just coordinating. And there I was a little bit disappointed what I saw is because nobody came up with something new here. So for the master students, these 3 forms were always replicated in all these articles. So everybody said, yeah, it's one of the 3. So that cannot be true. I mean, Keith and myself, we were sitting at my kitchen table and we were drawing these forms, and we thought, okay, let's give it a try, and other people will start working on it, and they will come with some other models, but everybody is kind of replicating. There are some new forms, but in principle, we see in the literature either self-governance, lead organization, and the most often described form. And it goes a little bit back also to Liesen, I think. You called them bridging organizations, yeah. So these bridging organizations, that's the form you see very often. And I will show also why that is the case, and I'm quite happy about that, because these networks are they're more interesting than the networks which are governed in this way. We are more sympathetic to this organizational form because we think this is a net. I'm finished? Okay. Yeah. We are sympathetic to that because we think that is something. Everybody is equal. Everybody communicates with everybody, and it's a kind of a community. The community model, but we see in practice that the brokered forms work much better, actually, and so we had that table to kind of predict which form you would expect more under which conditions, and what I said, this form is mostly more interesting because that's actually the form which allows for a lot of organizations, because in this first form, the number Andrew said this morning, put 12 people in a room and not more, that fits to that form. But I think in many networks you need more than 12 organizations. I'm actually working as a volunteer in a network of 35 organizations, and I cannot say, all the other organizations we don't need, because we need, everybody of them has a piece of the puzzle, so we need them. So the question is really, how do you build an organization, a network of 35 organizations? And the answer is governance. So you can find a governance solution to that. Same for trust. Do all organizations need to trust each other? Yes, in the case of this network, but in this case, not. Trust is actually something, and that is very good, because in some of these networks, people don't trust each other. But it's not a problem. You can think in terms of governance, people collaborating without trust. I'm going to finish. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I will. So what explains the differences? Also, there, not a lot of research yet. One article I'm very happy with that was published which proves the trust argument which I said before, because we kind of developed that theoretically, but we had no empirical base for that. But now there is a paper which actually shows that in the absence of trust, you can expect the NIO network to do it quite well on the basis of that paper. And the impact of network governance arrangements, I've put them here, also not really impressive. What we see is that when it comes another topic for the master students, measuring the effectiveness of networks is really still a big issue. So that is still is really a big issue. How can we think and how can we conceptualize about the effectiveness of dealing with network governance as an independent variable? So that's my conclusion. What is there? Yeah, there are some sentences for which I can elaborate more, but I don't have the time, and I'll have to stop here. Thank you very much.